Hello, everyone. Welcome to Real Talk with Tia and Jill. We are so happy to have you this Wednesday afternoon for me in Eastern time, but maybe still
True.
morning,
It's still morning over here.
maybe evening, depending on where you are in the world. But we're
I
happy
know.
you're here
Sometimes we have our friends join us from like Germany and the UK. That's always such a treat
with us.
when our
Yes.
audience shares where they're joining from. So
Mhm,
if
mhm.
you're out there, let us know. Let us know you're there because you
Yeah.
matter. And we want to know that you're out there and be part of this conversation today. It is going to be a good one. And of course, we always love to know where you are as well.
We love to hear your perspectives, your questions. So please also put that in the chat, as well as your responses, right? Because today we're talking about leadership, right? And spotting leadership gaps. And this is top of mind for us because we've been having a lot of conversations around problems and how leadership plays a huge piece of that.
Mm-hmm. To even set the stage, Tia, I haven't even told you this yet.
Ooh.
But yesterday, my boys are in baseball, and I
Mhm.
get this text from one of them that says, "Hey, the bus is crowded. Can we ride home with you?" Because they had to take a bus for a away game. So it's the JV and the varsity teams going together.
Right,
And I was like, well, of course, no, because you need to be with your team.
right.
But then afterwards, the conversation was really interesting because I said, well, what made it so crowded? There's plenty of seats based on the number of people. And I know you all have a bag. And they're like, well, the varsity team got on and they sat in the back and they sat one per seat. They would not move.
Mm.
And I'm like, well, didn't anybody come up and say, hey, we could use a little more room? Can we put our bag here or something? No, the coaches told them that they were supposed to do two per seat. So there was enough room for everyone. And I'm
Mhm.
like, but it didn't happen. Why not? Well, they just didn't listen. And I'm like,
Mm.
well, did they really know? Yes. The coaches told them like 6 times. And I said, boys, that is a coaching problem.
Mhm.
And coaches, if you're out there, I know it's not easy. So, but
Just like leadership,
right?
right? Leadership's not easy.
No, it's not easy, but it's a coaching problem because we said go do this
Mhm.
doesn't mean it was received.
Yes.
And so what we talked about were options like having people repeat back, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
But this is one of these gaps in leadership, and that's what we're talking about today,
Yes. Oh, that's such a great story
right?
because
Because had they even gotten on and like looked in back and saw everyone was one per seat, they could have made a move and had leadership in action at that moment. But
Mhm.
instead, we've created this space and this culture that's we don't really have to listen.
Right. Right. And if we don't, right, nothing will happen. People will
Yeah.
find alternatives. That is such a great story because I think sometimes people can relate to personal things that happens in our lives and then relate it to the work that we do, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
how many times do we train, say the same things over and over, but we still feel like people don't get it or people don't follow the process. We say, take a look at leadership, right? Take a look
Mm-hmm.
at yourself. If you're the person that's doing all the training, and no one's getting it, you need to take a look at yourself and how you are approaching the problem from a leadership standpoint, because
Yeah,
that makes a difference.
it does.
Makes a difference.
Yeah, we are diving into this. And Judith, we are happy to have you with us
Yes.
today.
Hello, Judith. Welcome.
Yes.
Welcome.
Yes. Oh, and Elena, hello. Good
Hi.
to have you out there too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Good morning for you, I
Oh,
think.
Michelle. Woohoo. Yeah.
Yeah, welcome. Thanks for being here today. We really want to hear each of your perspectives as we kind of lead into, how do we dodge? Are we dodging, situations that we really should be leading in? We would love to hear your perspective. So stick around, add to the comments.
Yeah. And part of what prefaced this was even after the summit, just some of the feedback
Mhm.
and some of the conversation around, gosh, well, this happens, and that's it's just people not following an SOP,
Right.
or we didn't follow the process, or Tia, we always talk about one of our favorites is, yep, well, this isn't working. So we're going to install, insert X software
Oh,
to
yes.
make that problem go away.
Yeah.
And that's why we really are hosting today's talk, because there's a difference between using tools and avoiding leadership.
Yes. Yes. You're absolutely right. And if this is your first time with us this week, I'm Tia, this is Jill, and we are the co-founders of Catalyst Food Leaders. And exactly what we're talking about is the space we love to play in, right? Like, we've been in food for several decades. We've worked on problems. And what we've seen is that when it comes to solving problems, if we only focus on regulation, procedures, SOPs, that we're really not moving the dial when it comes to culture, when it comes to how the behaviors you want to see. So we play in that spot of, how do we help build your leaders so they can tackle the business problems in front of them and not sticking a Band-Aid on it. Like, I like to think about many times organizations use training as a Band-Aid. Oh, we're just going to retrain. I mean, how many times do you see that written on a CAPA? Retrain, 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 right? Like,
reject.
Exactly, right. It's a Band-Aid, and you really are dodging the leadership that is needed to solve those problems. And that's the space that we play in. We help organizations really focus on their leadership so that they can deliver results.
Yeah. And if you're out there, our stories. Like, I've had to learn this the hard way, or I learned it the hard way. Just with not being the leader that I needed to be. And today's show reminds me of this, because there were things like, well, let's just update that SOP.
Yeah.
Or there would be things where right, we have good people who know a lot about our processes and what happens. I shouldn't say it never crossed my mind, but to get into the weeds about something as, to me, that seems really apparent. We're going to call it probably like common sense. Like, hey, if you think you're going to have a recall at your plant, you need to get the corporate team involved. Like, I never thought I'd have to utter words like that. And then I was surprised when I did. Because I thought, wow, how are we not all on the same page?
Right. Yeah.
And this is where my coach was like gentle, but really ripped the Band-Aid off and was like, that's you.
Yeah.
You assuming people know what you need or how things need to work, or that you're all on the same page, is you. You're the leader.
Yes.
And if you don't start taking ownership of that and being radically owning your leadership, you're going to run into that more and more and more.
Yes. Yes.
And it hurt. It hurt because I was like, I feel like I'm like, how do I do this without people feeling like kindergartners? How do I do this so people feel respected? How do I do this so that we leverage what we all have together? And that's, I think, the sweet spot of like, how do you do that to be a respectful, an effective, people-focused, like goal-driven leader?
Yes. That's really interesting that you said, like, how do I do this in a respectful way without treating people like kindergartners? And I feel like that's something that as leaders, we think about, whether consciously or unconsciously, because when you said that, I just thought back to times where I was like, well, we're adults, right? Like, think about the language that we use. Well, we're adults. Of course they know, right? Like, just like your story, just assuming those things. And you feel like if you voice those things and, well, I'm hand holding, right? Or I'm doing someone else's job, or I'm, insert all the things that we say. But it makes me think about Brene Brown's clear is kind. And in reality, we're just being clear about our expectations, right? We're being clear about what we hope to see or the path that we're going down. We're being clear and we're leading, right? We're leading in those situations because, like, I don't think the same way that you think, right? And vice versa. And, Michelle, you think differently than I do. And so I think that I am communicating to you clearly, but in reality, I'm talking Tia talk, right? I'm talking Tia talk, and it needs to be for everyone to understand. And so that clarity It's not treating people like a kindergartner or holding their hands or, insert the thing, babysitting adults, the things that we say all the time
Mhm.
in industry. It's not that at all. You're
Yeah.
actually being really kind to people and letting them know what they need to be successful.
Yeah. And that's what leadership is about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when we reframe that to say, our responsibility is to make sure people have success. And yeah, the cliche of it,
Mm-hmm.
but taking it to heart and doing it different is when you step into leadership.
Yes.
I know
Yes.
I'm on a little soapbox right now, but it reminds me of job descriptions. Like, how
Oh,
many people come into a role where they're, insert role name? If it's anything, typically, more than a technician, where it's very defined on what we're doing at what exact time and how often,
mm-hmm.
usually it's general, right? Like, you're responsible for hold tags, you're responsible for kappas, you're responsible for training. That is not clear.
Yeah.
That's not clear. And I think the more we examine where we have those gaps, then we get to see, like, am I leading or am I using that to dodge? And it's
Yeah.
not an intentional dodge. Nobody does that on purpose. It's
Right.
just the space of stepping into doing it different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And stepping outside of what we've always done, right? Even if it is different, it's uncomfortable. But it is so different than maybe even the way that leaders before you have done it or the organization is even used to.
Mhm.
And there's ways, I can't wait till we get into the conversation, because even thinking about being in a scenario where, well, everyone sort of slaps the training thing on, and people are going to feel like I'm not doing my job if I'm not doing the training. Well, I mean, you can do the training. We're not saying not to train, but how are you also leading in the situation? So you're not overtraining or really wasting your time, because they don't really need training. They need leadership. And so that's important to think about as we have this conversation.
Yeah. If we go back to my original story, there's nobody in high school that doesn't understand it's not one person per seat.
Right.
Everybody can understand what that means.
Right.
But
Yeah.
clearly the execution in there did not work. And that is the
Mm.
same thing when we talk about training.
Right. Exactly.
Those words don't always get they don't always get received in the way with the outcomes that you want to have.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Michelle, you bring up an interesting point too when you talk about we need to be able to talk business. To be able to talk business leaders in business terms, we have to speak their language. Absolutely. And I think that when we talk about language and speaking business talk, sometimes we overdo it,
Mm-hmm.
right? But the way that I think about this is that we have to be able to relate the things that we're doing to the organization.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I feel like sets Catalyst apart, is that we are focused on business outcomes. And so your leadership needs to drive business outcomes, right? They need to drive completing your goals. If not, we need a shift.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about business talk, I think about that. I think about how can you as a leader easily translate to your audience on what's important to drive those business goals. And as technical leaders, we struggle because we're trying to use technical terms or, we're nerds, right? So like we dig deep into the topic, and in reality, some people might love that. And if they love it, give it to them, right? Because that's how you can move forward with that person. If they don't, okay, how do you main point message? How are you clear enough to be able to communicate what you need and how it fits with their need, right? To drive business results. So I 100% agree with that.
Yeah. That goes back to the cliche, meet people where they're at.
Yes.
Because I think sometimes the way it gets interpreted, or I remember even our HR team always saying, like, write it for a 6th grade level. And I'm like, I understand, but we have adults.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to, quote, dummy things down.
Right.
Like, people understand things when we meet them where they're at, so they can be invited to be in the conversation, to ask questions. So there's definitely a difference.
Mm-hmm. And that takes leadership.
Yes. So Tia, right? wrote down a few scenarios
Yes.
that we want to go through. And we want to play a game of, is this leading or is this dodging?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So our first one is that we have a direct report who is not following the SOP.
Mm-hmm.
They're just not following it. And you notice this and you kind of like, yeah, okay. And finally, you're like, we're just going to talk about it at the next team meeting. Is that leading or is that dodging?
I'm curious in the comments. Is that leading or dodging?
Mm-hmm.
From my perspective, as people are writing in, immediately when I hear someone's not following an SOP, and then we want to talk about the SOP or update the SOP as the first next step, I see that as dodging. Because if someone's not following an SOP, now say that, Michelle, I agree, dodging. Because say that they're not following the SOP is, they're not following the steps that's there, then it's not your documentation, right? And there might be some gray areas. There might be some spots you need to update, right? There's all about continuous improvement. But for this situation, if the rules are there, the policy is there, right? 2 people per seat on the bus, then that's what it is. Let's talk to people about what's preventing them from following the SOP, right? What is something that maybe I can't see? What is something in the behaviors that might be preventing them from doing it? And it might just be, I don't feel like this is the most efficient way to do it, right? That's okay. But it's not leading if you're just looking at the SOP.
Well, but I also think from a leader standpoint, so if I'm the leader and someone's not following the SOP and I'm like, we'll get it at the next team meeting.
Yes.
What do I tell that person and people on my team about expectations in our culture?
Right. Yeah.
And often it's, but I got an afternoon full of meetings that I can't miss.
Mm-hmm.
How long does it take to step into a spot and be like, hey, I noticed there's something that I noticed. Can we talk about it for a moment?
Yes. Yes.
Doesn't take long.
Mm-hmm.
And then if there is follow-up, you can always do it at the team meeting. And the other part is if it's an individual, why would we wait to a team meeting?
Right. Exactly. Good point. Right.
So I think sometimes as leaders, we use this, right? Because we're not ready perhaps to lean in and ask, or we feel like it might be confrontational, or gosh, my to-do list is so busy.
Mm-hmm.
That is not leading. That's doing.
I think one of the points too that you brought up that we forget about is that timing of, if this is important, and it might not be like, hey, we didn't have an issue this time, but you feel like if people don't follow this SOP or they're not doing the actions you want to see, that it could lead to a bigger issue, and you see it as a priority, you want to talk about it as soon as possible. Mm-hmm. And waiting, exactly what you're saying, Jill, waiting for something that you see as a high priority is telling them that it is not a high priority.
Right.
What are you doing?
It wrong. It's not a high priority.
Exactly. We can wait to next week, or we can wait to the end of the week to have this conversation. And for some things that might be true. Mm-hmm. But you think about and examine as you're having these conversations, are you dodging the conversation because you have meetings, you're not ready for the conflict, you insert, or are you stepping up as a leader and saying, hey, this is a risky situation. Let's have this conversation right now.
I love Judith. Of course, Judith, you're like, I love to dodge a meeting for having that conversation.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, not right. As you could tell, none of these are like all in on one or the other. There's always, well, it depends. But I think the challenge is how many times has something come up and you're like, oh, I'll call them later.
Yes.
Or I'll get to that later. Mm-hmm. When really the answer should be, let me just pause for 10 minutes and talk about this now.
Right. Even if, especially like you said, like an individual, right? Like have that conversation now.
Gosh, even if it was the team. Sometimes you do need to be like all together.
True. And I want people to think about, like, when are the times that your organization did this? They're communicating that this is important, right? And that's what you want to communicate too for your goals.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So another, leading or dodging. So here's the thing. You know what, Tia, I am just really annoyed with somebody over here that I'm working with, and I'm just going to tell you all about it instead of going to talk to them.
Right.
Because
So,
I just need to vent. I just needed to vent and tell someone. And of course, because you're my work buddy, you're like, oh yeah, I get it. Oh, you're so in the right. Uh-huh.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Me
How am I
too.
doing as a leader?
Definitely dodging conversations. Dodging conversations. Let me tell you this. I don't think I've ever told you the story, Jill, about a situation that I was in, and we had this operations leader. He was responsible for all of operations at our facility, and he and we had some disagreement thing going on. I can never remember exactly what it was about. But he was upset at me and I was upset at him. And I was talking to a friend exactly like what you're saying. I was talking to a friend about this, like, I don't know why he's being difficult. I don't know why this is happening, right? And she was like, let's go talk to him. So she stepped into the leader role and said, let's go talk to him. And so we did. I said, okay, let's go talk to him. So we talked, and she walked in and she's like, hey, Tia's not happy with you. And he goes, okay. And this is why. And so we talked about it. And it turned out through that conversation that he was upset at another quality engineer, and there was something that was happening on that line that an auditor found. And they had talked about her correcting it. And she never got around to it. So it was found on an audit. So he was annoyed at that situation and was almost like taking it out on other quality members on the team. And so when we talked about it, he kind of talked about being annoyed with that situation. And I had to tell him, well, I'm not that person, right? And that was 100% a mistake that person made. That has nothing to do with me in the situation that we're talking about here. And we kind of just cleared the air. And at the end, it was like, yeah, Tia, you're right. I'll go and do this. And how can I help you? From my perspective, how can I help you with my teammate so that you're not running into the situation in the future? Because I didn't know about that situation, that they had a conversation and all these other things. So I've actually been in this situation where I was dodging, right? And I was talking about how this person was so annoying and I don't know why.
They called you out on it.
Right? I was just so lucky that my work bestie stepped in as a leader and said, let's go talk to him.
Yes.
And it literally was solved in a 10-minute conversation.
Yeah. But, right, once again, how often we see this is avoided, where it's like, well, once again, I don't have time. I've got a meeting. Maybe I don't feel like it's my place.
Yes. Yeah. It's not my job.
Maybe we're doing status management. Like, well, I can't tell them that.
Right. Yes. Yes.
We get that those are real things. We're not trying to downplay that these can be challenges, but that's also why, obviously, we're in this space. You got to build the human skills to be able to have leadership skills. You don't just have good communication if you don't have the ability to step into hard conversations or understand your own awareness and what your body's telling you you're scared of.
Exactly. It's that awareness to say, yeah, I can give feedback in this situation because I'm a leader here. And situations where it's like, it's not appropriate for me to give feedback right now. So that's a part of leadership.
It is.
Good one.
We had that as one of our catalyst mindset principles, right? When we don't talk about people, we talk with people.
Yes.
So every time you find yourself talking about someone, that's a good moment to go, should I be just talking to them about this?
Right. Exactly.
That's leading.
Yes.
And we there are things where you're like, sometimes you ask people about things because you do need some perspective, but it's also, once again, intent.
Yes.
And framing. Because if you're like, well, I'm just going to go blah, 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 blah. But instead, if you're like, I experienced this and I want to go talk to someone, have you had a similar experience? Or was it just?
Yes. Yes.
There are ways to do this that still put you as leading versus avoiding.
Yeah. It's even a good question to ask yourself if you're in any of these scenarios, like, I'm the action that I'm doing. do I feel like I'm dodging something, right? Am I not stepping into a spot because I feel uncomfortable, or I'm shying away from something, or fear, right? Fear of insert. Then you become more aware of, okay, I'm dodging this situation, or no, this is the right time. I need to wait until emotions die down, or this other critical thing disappears, and then we can have a conversation. Those are real situations too.
Yeah.
But asking yourself, am I dodging? Right? Am I dodging? Am I stepping away from something just because I feel uncomfortable, or I feel like I might not be ready for the conversation? That will help put it in perspective.
All right. So here's the next: leading or dodging. Gemba walks.
Oh yeah. When we were preparing for this, we had some conversation around it. And this okay, I guess we should say the scenario, right? First, and I love the D for disasters, by the way. Is it leading or a disaster? Right? Because that's what dodging can do. So let's talk about Gemba walks. Your leadership team decides they need to be more present on the floor. So they get their leadership group together and say, we're going to go down to the floor and do these Gemba walks with no specific purpose, but to be seen. Leading or dodging? Let me talk about leading for a second in this situation, because I do have opinion, but I will say, let me talk about the leading side first. Many times when I've heard leaders talk about this, it's because they're trying to be more present on the floor. They, for whatever reason, someone on the leadership teams feel like leadership has spent way too much time in their office or on meetings.
They're disconnected.
And they should go to the floor and have conversations at some frequency. I've seen it done. We're going down every day, first thing in the morning when we come, right? And we're gonna talk, or we're gonna separate the facility and do an area per week type thing. So you go every day, but you see an area once a week. And it's a lack of connection with the floor is what they're trying to do when they do these Gemba walks. So they have the idea that they want to be seen as a leader, leading, and be available, right? Like when you are walking and you're face to face, the goal is that they are now available to have some talks while they are going on these quote unquote Gemba walks. So I see people in the comment taking selfies. You know what? I've seen it. I've seen it. I've definitely seen it, taking pictures and stuff like that. Ooh, dodging by intimidation.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I love the perspectives. Right? Gemba walks brings up different things, like just to be seen. When you say taking selfies, Judith, I think, oh, yep, because we need to be seen.
We need to be seen. Yeah.
Dodging by intimidation. Yeah. Sometimes it can feel like that. Right? You're on the floor and you're like, whoa, what are they all doing here? What's happening?
Yeah. Yes.
But sometimes it can be, Elena, like you say, like, oh, okay, if we come through and it has, how do we make it valuable and effective?
Right. And to me, that is the key. Like even when we were talking about the scenario, Joe, I remember you brought up like, oh yeah, you go down, you talk about the metrics for the day, right? You talk about those hits. And I'm like, no, they're not even doing that. And you're like, oh yeah, right? Like Gemba walks also has a definition. Number one, it's not just walking around, right? Taking selfies or just having conversation. Again, you could do that. Not saying you cannot do that. That builds a different type of relationship, right? But I don't know if that qualifies as a Gemba walk. But going down to the floor, talking about your metrics on the floor, right? Having those conversations, problem solving, right? Being valuable. I like, Elena, even the words that you're using, right? Around value and effective. Leadership, Michelle, leadership is working with the employees that experience the challenges. That's like a purpose where we're going to talk about, wow, we've been having so many line stops here. Let's go and talk and see what's going on and be a part of that. Those are great things. And I think that is leading, right? When you say, hey, we've been having issues. We're going to let the team know we're going to be down at a certain time to talk about that, to watch, to, investigate and help be a part of the solution. The part
that's purpose.
That's purpose, right?
That's intentional, which is leadership.
Versus we haven't spent time on the floor, so I'm going to go down there, right? And I'm going, not just myself, going to go down there and have conversation. I'm going to round up all the senior leaders to go down and walk the floor and have the conversation. And one thing that I love doing during this time is to almost have a conversation with people like after that has happened. Just to see what did you get from it? Does this help you? What do you think about it? And one of the most common things that I hear is that it is distracting. Distracting, intimidation.
So like that's one where it's like kind of without purpose, where all of a sudden you're like, oh, people are here.
Yeah.
Those are distracting.
Distracting. Or it's like, well, I'm having problems with this piece of equipment. You're coming down and wanting to talk or take selfies or, right? Like, it's like, I'm working here. This is my workspace. If I was going to do this, which there are times where I'm like, I have not been to the floor today. I need to get to the floor. But I'm going with a purpose. I want to have this conversation, or I want to ask this type of question of like, hey, I'm working on this project. How's this with you? And I'm checking with different lines to see if there's a difference in opinion. Or sometimes I am just like, hey, I haven't seen you today. What's going on? Any issues down here? Right. That's my purpose, is to have those type of conversations versus I'm laughing with my group of leaders here. We're laughing, we're talking, and we're just walking through and saying hi.
So what I'm sensing from all the things you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, it's like when they're done with purpose, they can be valuable.
Yes.
But if it's and the purpose matters, because if the purpose is, well, we just need to be seen, then that's probably dodging.
Right.
Because it is probably related to, we haven't spent enough time with our people.
Yes.
To be able to know what's actually going on. So we're going to all kind of get to there together and go.
Right.
Versus something from this place of like, I think Elena even said, being valuable and like this learning and knowledge gathering. But I think the bigger part that you talked about that really sticks with me is the servant leadership side. Like if we're down there and there's something going on, like how do we engage to be like, we are here to be helpful,
right,
and better understand than to get in your way.
Right.
So that also then kind of relates that as part of that leading is communication. It's inviting people to be along.
Yes.
And it's really kind of that collaborating with versus, well, we just showed up and tell me what's happening here.
Exactly. Yes. I love
because it really then makes it really is kind of, I'm going to say almost a power differential where it's like, well, we showed up and this time is valuable, right? How many times do we go, oh my gosh, your time is so valuable? Everybody's time is valuable.
Right.
Mine is not more important than anybody else's in anywhere.
Yes.
So it doesn't matter. Like it's still this mutual respect of time and what we're doing.
And what you said about the purpose matters. And we talk about this a lot in our empowerment workshop, where we have this shared purpose. Many times leadership comes up with this idea of walking the floor together in their own bubble. So they haven't had the conversation around, hey, when we're on the floor, what do you hope to gain from that? Or what do you hope to see us do differently or the same, right? Stop, start, continue, right? When you see us on the floor, how often do you even want to see us in this way of walking, right? And talking, like how is that beneficial to you as the employee? So that we can have this shared purpose of, well, I need this from you and I need this from you in this setting. That could be our shared purpose where, yes, we go down to the floor every day to talk about this thing because this will help our people. That's important as we think about, leadership and even shifting culture, right? Like if I have my own purpose and I'm doing my own thing and other people are like not helpful for me, right? It's actually damaging to the culture.
Yeah, and I will add to that as well. I think just Gemba walks in general typically means multiple people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what I would caution people to consider is if I'm a direct leader of people that I'm coming Gemba walking to, how often am I coming to their workspace to check in with them when I'm not Gemba-ing around?
Right.
Because I think that's the part where I think we would probably say that's dodging. Like, well, I showed up, but this one-on-one leading and being available and creating the space for that person or your team is important to do. And the dynamics in that are very different on an individual basis than on a Gemba walk basis.
Yes. Yes. And I feel like that's what's missing when people talk about doing these walks with basically no purpose other than to, be seen or to say, hey, this is my time to be here, is that they're missing that piece that really you should be doing that individually and building those relationships individually versus as a senior leadership team. And there might be times that you need to do that, right? Or that it's effective for your culture. So if it's working for you and people love it, continue doing it, right? Because that's what your people want and need. If you feel like you're not getting anything from it, and I see it in these situations, they really only last a few weeks. then it's no longer happening. But that's because it's not actually driving any positive outcome, right? It's not actually solving the problem that they see.
All right, that's true. All right, here's another leading or dodging.
Mm-hmm.
In our community, we're really fortunate we've got a fantastic community. We also have a great blend of people in different roles. Something that we hear not only with clients, but in our community, and we've seen as well. I want to know if this is leading or dodging. Something goes wrong in your facility, in the company, and they come to you as the food safety quality leader and say, what do we need to do? So what I'm curious about is when often what I hear, I've even done it myself, is I say, here are my recommendations. Is this leading or dodging?
So as a leader, as a food safety and quality leader, someone needs you or asking
they say, how do we fix this?
How do we fix it?
What do we need here?
My recommendations. I'm curious from the chat.
My recommendations.
This is leading or dodging? Leading or dodging?
And of course, obviously, you probably catch on my wording here.
Yeah.
Because as we talked earlier, like when are we a business partner? When are we an owner?
Yeah. When we were talking about this scenario, I brought up that I realized that I used the word, I recommend this in a situation that I do not want ownership for. So it's typically a situation that I feel like my team, my operations team or someone is making a decision that I personally would not sign off on. And so I would say that I recommend you do this versus in scenarios that we are team. And it doesn't mean necessarily that I would have made that decision, but the decision is fine, right? There's risk we can cover. It might not be my way of thinking, but again, like this is what the team has decided to do. Then to me, my language changed. And I did not realize this until you brought up this scenario where my language is more like, okay, this is the direction we're going in. This is what we're going to do. And you might have these questions, but this is how we're going to tackle them versus this is my recommendation, right? It one removes ownership. and therefore removes that business partnership.
Yeah, and this one is a little vague, and I see some of the comments coming in about, well, is it your issue? Is there discussion? What's your role? All good questions. Purposely left it vague.
Yes.
But I think the part that really stands out when I think about kind of the framework for this, I probably didn't do that quite as well as I didn't communicate that as well as I could have, was, it could be even something like, hey, we need to update our specifications. What needs to be included?
Mm-hmm.
And for whatever reason, right, maybe there's not an R&D team who's doing that. Maybe there is, but they come to food safety calling. What needs to be on there? Well, here are my recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it, here's what needs to be on there?
Right.
So that we understand and we know what we're getting in or sending out or whatever it is. Like, are we conforming or not conforming?
Mm-hmm. Language, right? And language is
about language.
Mm-hmm.
Or what do you think we should do here? I think the part that kind of stands out to me, or the part that I'm thinking about, are the times where people are like, well, we don't get to own anything. So we just have to kind of make recommendations, and then, somebody else has the final decision on this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the part that made me think about leading or dodging. Because I think, Judith, you've hit the nail on the head. Depending on your role, like, what are your actual expectations and responsibilities?
Right.
If you are in a spot where people look to you to say, what do we do?
Mm-hmm.
You probably should really consider like your ownership in that role.
Yes.
And that also aligns with, leaders and people around you to say, what do I have the authority to make decisions on?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because
I think that often isn't as clear as it needs to be in our space. And we find ourselves in this kind of gray zone where we're indecision.
Right. Exactly.
And then we're not leading. We're not technically dodging, but we're not leading either.
Right. Exactly. We don't have the ownership. I think this is a really good one for people to think about what type of culture they want to have and what type of language they're using to support that culture. Mm-hmm. How many times do you say, well, we hear this all the time. Well, we want food safety and quality to own it, right? Or we want our people to own it. We want to empower them to own. Yep. But then we use language like, well, you're recommending that to us. We have the final say. You don't have the final say. Well, then that's not ownership, mm-hmm. right? Yeah, I think, Michelle, the must versus maybe, right? Like
disposition's a good one.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Typically, food safety, you have final disposition on what we do with this product.
Mm-hmm.
Does that always happen? Not necessarily.
Right. What kind of culture you have?
What does that mean? We have final disposition. I've been in situations where I'm like, you've asked me to be final disposition, but what you've taken is my position as a recommendation.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Yes.
Which rolls into a business decision.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I just need to understand what the expectations are.
Right.
Because
exactly.
Am I leading? Am I dodging? What space am I playing in so that I can understand?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I feel like that's so important. And maybe and again, I hadn't really thought about it in this way before until right now as we talk.
I'm so glad.
I know, but I'm like, I need to think back, right, to just cultures and even clients that we're working with. Is like, what type of language are you using specifically around ownership and recommendations and like who has that final say? I remember even being in organizations where the plant manager, no matter what, has the final say over food safety, over operations, over logistics, over everything. They're the final say. So everyone is really just giving recommendations on the path to go down. Well, who has ownership? One person, right? I don't own decision making, right? If something happens because something was a decision was made, well, I didn't make the decision. And then they want to put it on someone else to fix, right? Because they're only one person. So if something happens, you need your team to help fix an issue. But it's hard to get your team motivated if they do not feel like they own it.
Yeah. And this happens at all different,
All
I'm going
levels.
to say, risk levels.
Mm-hmm.
Think even about recalls. Who is the one who actually says we are recalling product?
Mm-hmm.
There isn't necessarily a right or wrong, but once again, understanding our role. So often that falls into food safety quality where, well, you're supposed to be responsible for recall. Cool. What parts?
Exactly. Yeah.
This goes back to the expectations again, and the whole, like when we have a job description that says you're responsible for recall,
Mm-hmm.
what does that involve?
Mm-hmm.
And does everybody know their roles? I know, Tia, we've often talked about even like RACEs. Those are things we've used in our past lives and other parts of our life.
Yeah.
Like really defining who's responsible, who's accountable, who you have to consult with, and who you inform.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it needs to flow, right? It needs to flow up and down the organization. In an organization where the head of food safety and quality, they're the person that says if we're going to have a recall or not. Well, that means everything that's preventing a recall needs to fall to that organization, right? So if that organization says, no, we can't do this because this is going to lead to a recall, or yes, we need to do this, or insert, right? That's that ownership of it to say, okay, if we get into a situation, I own that follow-up. I own that. At that point, it would be a recommendation to the person that's going to own us saying we're going to have a recall or not, right? Mm-hmm. We're going to do a withdrawal or not, right? Like if that person owns it, food safety and quality, you own whether or not we have a recall or not. But I'm not privy to anything else that has to do with it, right? Or my team is only providing you recommendations on what to do with product or how to move product. Then it sounds like I should be recommending to you if you should recall or not, because it doesn't make sense for me to have that ownership when I really don't own how we do things.
Yeah. And I think it's a great example of something where we're like, oh gosh, if it's not clear, let's just update the SOP or the flow chart or whatever that looks like, and then it should work.
Yeah.
Of course, that doesn't help clarify all these things if we're not having these real conversations with people on these scenarios to say what would actually happen.
Right.
What would we do as an organization? How would our teams respond? Who needs to be in, like, not just who needs to be involved, but who's doing this part?
Yes.
And I think that's the part where when we talk, like, even as we talked about this leading or dodging real talk, is that we tend to say, well, let's just update a process.
Right.
Or let's just make that electronic because then you can't skip steps and it requires all the field.
Oh yes. Love that.
I have some pencil whipped electronic documents. You all have too. Right. We've had the ones where they even pop up. Oh, this is wrong. Do step 1, 2, 3. Right. It's skipped, but they just go, okay.
Okay. Right.
Right. And you're supposed to put a decision. You're supposed to put a comment in. Was bad. We already knew that.
Right. That's why you. It's so true, right? Like, I mean, I feel like that's another scenario of like, if your team is not filling out the paper documentation, they're not going to fill out the software documentation. No. It's not, you need to step into leading, right?
So I think this is where I love how you put it earlier. Like, this is the moment where you pause and go, am I leading or is this dodging?
Right.
Am I relying on something else to bring people along with me?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer isn't always that's bad.
Right?
Heck, tools, fantastic. Yeah. But tools are not they will only short-term mask leadership problems.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Right? Your leadership problems are going to come up. Mm-hmm. Regardless, they're going to show up, and you can add your band-aids, right? You can add your SOPs, you can make a complicated flow chart, you can reorg, you can do all of these things, right? But it still does not take away from the fact that you need to lead differently. Right? You need to lead differently. And when you do lead differently, which I'm sure as we talk about these scenarios, right, we can probably talk about 5 more where people have stepped into leadership in these scenarios, right? Instead of saying they're not following the SOP, we're going to meet next team meeting, you actually pull them aside and say, hey, I noticed that you skipped this step. what's going on here?
Mhm.
Right? Like there's moments where, ooh, when I did that, right, I saw a shift. When this happened, I saw a shift. I saw behaviors change. And if you think about that, the SOP was a tool, but your leadership, right? Your leadership was like that, I like to call it some magic sauce, right? That is absolutely needed for behaviors to change. If all we needed was a SOP, we would be
We're
like
golden. Right?
Yes.
But I think it also comes up even as, I love that our industry likes to share, and even sharing in articles about like, hey, when this went wrong, I mean, right?
Mm-hmm.
Insert company name or issue.
Yes.
Like those are real. I'm not saying they are not.
Mm-hmm.
Believe me. And we keep saying leadership isn't easy. But a lot of those things, a lot of the non-conformances we have on audits, a lot of the things, like they all do come down to leadership.
Yes, they do.
And I know sometimes that oversimplifies and people are like, I can't write up my management team. How will you be able to lead versus avoid? Because that's where they need you most, in that space, to say, how do you have real conversations to say, look, this isn't working? Because that gets left off, right? We just saw like another great article, and they talked about, they recognized that these issues were part of the culture. Yes. But then from there, what we looked for, of course, was how do I create leaders to shift the culture?
Yes.
Because it's yay, culture. But what's the solution?
Right, exactly. And what are some things, right, that you can measure that's not just, right, audit scores or updating SOPs or training? And again, those things might need to happen. You might need to close gaps in your programs. Absolutely. But if you do not have leadership measures in place, then it will be difficult for you to sometimes get there, but then to sustain those results that you might see. And you're right, it sounds vague. Culture sounds vague, right? Updating your programs sounds vague. What is it that your organization needs, right? Do you need to build relationships? Do you need to help foster trust and safe spaces? Do you need to actually work on ownership and shift the way that we have conversations? Those are your metrics, right? Those are your metrics. And that's what we help organizations do, is to take a look at their culture, take a look at their people, and decide, what is it that we need our leaders to do to support our business goals, right? Our present and future business goals. And that looks different, right, Jill? We've worked with many clients, and even though they're similar in many ways, they might have different metrics because of where they are within their organization. And people are different, right? People are different, and these cultures are different. And so what you need might be different than what someone else needs. It doesn't mean that there's not a metric out there that fits for your organization. And I will also say this, like, there's not a leading metric, right, that you can't use to help with your leadership, because a lot of times we look at lag metrics. An audit score, well, that's already kind of done, right? What is going to help predict that lag metric, right? Getting your leadership team in development, having one-on-ones, like whatever those happen to be for your leaders is important. Those are those lead metrics that I feel like we know they exist. We just forget about them because they're harder.
Yeah, or we check the box. I always think of one when people say, like, well, what would be important? Well, if I'm a leader, you should all be judging me on how well I am leading others. But that means more than just check, they have a leadership development plan in the file.
Right. Yes.
So it has to go past that, because if I'm truly being a servant leader, then I am constantly supporting, grooming, helping others around me, not just my team, move into spaces that they haven't been before. And you all know that feels different when you have somebody who's doing that.
Yeah.
And that's the part that our industry doesn't love, because it's hard to capture the love in that and that feeling and put it into a number, which is why it's qualitative.
Right.
That's conversation and that's feedback. That's not always something you're going to capture on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being
Right.
not at all and 5 being all the time. Those aren't always captured there. And that too is part of leadership, understanding that it's in these other spaces
Right.
that you have to find answers.
And it doesn't mean it cannot be a SMART goal. It can be, right? Those can be SMART goals. It doesn't have to be a number or red, green, yellow, or, we're so used to that as metrics. We have to step outside of the box.
Yeah. Actually, you could still use red, yellow, green, right? Like, do you feel like you're developing? I would love to know, people out there. Do you feel like you're developing? Is it a red, yellow, or green? And like intentional development, where you want to go.
Yes.
Because I too have been in those, like, we had 5 fires last week. Boy, did I learn things.
Right.
I don't love my learning being served to me like that.
I know.
I need growth in some other ways.
You know what? That is like, we should do that topic one day. Just talking about, and really it falls within firefighting. But I feel like our industry is sort of in this mindset that in order for us to grow, we have to be in these fires all the time. Or we have to be.
That's just their oxytocin and adrenaline kicking in.
Yes.
That's not real.
Yes.
No, I mean, it's real, but.
And you do learn, right? You learn in crisis, but you can also learn in not a crisis, right?
Yeah.
You can learn when there's not a crisis. You can learn in situations every day, right? And be prepared for a crisis so it doesn't even feel that big once it comes, right?
Exactly.
That's the goal.
Yes.
That's the goal.
And if your goal is, yes, I'm ready to do something different, then I will shamelessly say, join us.
Join us.
We have cohorts starting in May. Boot camp starts May 6th. That is foundational pieces of not just skills like communicate better, but how do we communicate better?
Yes.
How do we create safer spaces? How do I create clarity and expectations? It's not just go do it.
Right.
That's what we do in boot camp. May 6th. Join us. If you're like, gosh, I feel like I've been working on that, but I really need some support to that next part of how do I help my people grow, and how do I make sure that I'm showing up as the leader I need to be, then strategic leader is for you. Boy. Yeah. I mean, I know I'm into cliches today, I guess, but Kelly, our friend Kelly Gartner, posted, because she's a coach too. She's like, right? Coaching changes lives.
Yeah, it really does.
And that's what I love about what we do. You come into it and you're like, I'm not really sure I'm going to get out of it. And you walk away and you're like, wow.
Yeah, I kind of think about like what boot camp is, this focus on self-awareness, and it's really changing you in your life and how you show up and your awareness there. Strategic allows you to do that even more for your team.
Yeah.
It really starts to connect, not just building relationships, but leveraging those relationships, right? So you can be a more strategic leader, right, in your organization, and a trusted business partner.
Yeah. And you may be like, gosh, that's not me right now, but I bet you know someone who would be good for either of those programs. So join us. We want to make it the biggest boot camp ever. I mean, not huge, because we still like small cohorts, but.
That's true. If it overflows, we will add another one.
Yes.
And then we do want to call out enrichment, because I think enrichment fits so well with this conversation. And if you have not seen our posts on enrichment or have our emails, a part of our email community, then sign up on our website. You will get this information.
Yeah.
But enrichment is designed for you to have this space to learn, practice, right, and reflect on the things you have been doing around leadership, so that you can come in and say, hey, I've been trying to step into leadership here, but behaviors are not changing. What are some other ways I can do this? And really source from the group that's there to figure out which path can I go down next, right? Or what's working well, so that you can help share that message with others in the industry. It is there for that continuous practice, right? And reflection in that growth. And enrichment is really how you build skills into competency.
Well, right? You keep coming back to the well. Because how many times do we do something and then like, gosh, I'm not looking at that leadership stuff. And then all of a sudden I feel like I've strayed far.
Yes.
You don't have to stray. Enrichment is meant so you don't have to stray.
Yes. So join us. We do have our first enrichment coming up on April 24th, I believe. Next week. So we are excited about that. Join us. The first 3 months is free. So you can join us in April. We're completely free. And we look forward to having you there.
Whew. Well, look, we made it through. We didn't even, I mean, even though Tia said we prepped a little, we're not prepping. We're just showing up to share. So,
but thanks for playing our game. It was fun.
Thanks for playing. Yeah, we loved it. We are so grateful that you spent the morning with us, or the afternoon or evening.
That's right. That's right. And we will see you next week. We're excited. Hopefully we plan on having a guest. And so you will hear more about that. And we also hope to see you in enrichment next week.
Yes.
Until then, enjoy.
Make it a great day.
Bye, everyone.